Namaskar. Are you looking for clarity and calm? This April, you have the opportunity to find it. Join Jayaji for a 2-day online series on Bhagavad Gita Chapter 1, specially for seekers from the US, Canada, UK, and other parts of Europe. These live talks are scheduled for 25th and 26th April on Zoom. To register for free and to identify timings for your country, click the link in the description box. If you are in India, help spread the word. Invite your loved ones who are overseas. Share the registration link with them. Now, let's continue with chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Any questions?
How to suspect the reality of the waking state?
How to suspect the reality of the waking? How to understand that it is an illusion? Right? You have to compare with the dream state. So when you have, most dreams we forget, but if you wake up from a dream, then there are chances that you remember fragments of it. So what you will remember is that it seemed so real, the dream, isn't it? When you're in the dream, it's very real. Your hunger is real, your sadness is real, your happiness is real, everything is real. And you, in the dream, believe that you have lived 60, 70 years. Whereas actually the dream has lasted for a few seconds. Okay? This is a fact that you realize after waking. Now what you have to do is try and give yourself reasons why the waking state is any more real than the dream. So you have to be your own devil's advocate. You understand? So if you say, of course this is real, if I tap on the table, it makes a sound, this is solid. Same thing you say in the dream. You say, I have lived so many years, I have a birth certificate. Same thing you say in the dream. When you say, this is my wife, these are my children, my friends, they will all swear by the fact that I am real. Same thing you say in the dream. So as you give yourself more and more reasons why this is any more real, you yourself smash them. So you then conclude that the waking state, I have no reason to believe that the waking state is any more real than the dream state. Right? So what it is when you're in any given state that seems real and you reject the other two states. Right? So this is the problem, this is the dilemma that King Janaka had. So he dreamt that he was a beggar begging in the same streets where he was king. So when he woke up, he didn't just dismiss it. He called an emergency meeting of his cabinet and asked them this question: am I the king who dreamt that I was a beggar? Or am I the beggar now imagining myself to be king? You understand? You must understand the question itself, because the question doesn't occur to any of us. You wake up and simply continue with the reality of the waking, not understanding that same thing you do in the dream. You may have had a full meal where in the waking state, you overate and you go to sleep. Within minutes, you can dream that you are a beggar suffering from starvation. You haven't eaten for 4 days. Okay? Now, suppose I have a passport to your dream, which can't happen, but you have to imagine it. And I tell you, how can you be starving? You have just had a full meal. Are you going to believe that? No, you'll say, what nonsense are you talking? I haven't seen food for 4 days. Right? So, the beauty of this whole illusion is that when you are in any given state, you swear by the reality of that state. And when you shift to another state, you swear by the reality of that state and negate this. You don't even want to think about it. Same thing with deep sleep. So then you start asking what King Janaka asked. What if this is false and that is real? So their ministers were not interested in the answer. They were only interested in keeping their seats, because Janaka said, if you don't come up with an answer, I will reshuffle the cabinet. You're all out of the cabinet. Then desperately they went looking for an answer, and they met this great sage, Ashtavakra, who then said, I will come at the appointed time and answer the king. And his answer was, you are neither. You are not the king, you are not the beggar, you are not the deep sleep. You are that Turyavastha, the fourth plane of consciousness. You are yourself. And that began King Janaka's journey. Right? So all of us need to have something to shake us out of our comfort zone. We are all very comfortable where we are, unfortunately. So there is no urge, there is no movement within us for anything better. It's like a pig. It's called in English pig's contentment. It's like a pig who's in the filth and dirt and slime and quite happy to be there. The pig doesn't have any mumukshata, no desire to get out of that filth. Right? We are like that. You know, that frog in the pond. You put a frog in a pond, a little thing of water. It's quite happy there. That is its world. And we are like that. Oh, you got married, you got a spouse, you got children, you got a job, you have a car, you have... Bas, you're content there. And now the latest is holiday abroad. Everyone I meet from anywhere saying, I went at a holiday. 1 year we went to Australia, next year we went to Sweden, third year we went somewhere else. And they talk as if, oh, that's like realization. What's the big deal? You take a flight, it flies, or you go to Italy, the flight is very close to the Alps. It's a beautiful sight. But that's it. Anyway, so this is your little world. And you must have that nudge, that something that shakes you out. And all of us need that, but nobody is provided that. I was lucky because I was a child when my grandfather used to talk about people who achieved excellence. Not only Indians of course, but Americans, Europeans, the British. And then I remember he's telling me, you must be the best in the world. He told all of us, all the grandchildren, in your field, nothing short of that. You must be the best. And then he said something, don't let the fact that you're a woman come in the way of your excellence. So, that stays with you. If you're open to it, it stays with you. And then you say, oh, what is the... You study, you get 95% or 98%, whatever your thing is. And then you join a nice college. And you come toppers there. And then you get married, you get a nice job. It's suffocating. To me, it was suffocating. I don't want this. So all of us must stretch and find our own lane, find our own speed, and then go, move. What are we doing? Stagnating. What you were doing 10 years back, same thing you're doing. Only difference is your income may have increased a little bit. But expenditure has also increased much more. Huh? You have a slightly bigger car, a bigger home, and that's it. But that vision, how many of us have? To compete with the best in the world or to compete with yourself. To even understand that you're capable of much more than what you've achieved so far. You get it? And you can get it at any age. You don't have to be young. Of course, the young must be told. But what do we teach our children? What do we tell our children? Get good marks. Huh? So you get admission in a good college. Why? So you excel in that. Why? So you may get a good job or you start a good business and you make a lot of money. And then what? Then you, of course, you get married. And then what? Nowadays, divorce. It's become routine. Huh? The more the parents spend on the wedding, the greater the likelihood that there will be a divorce. So when I'm invited to a wedding, I dare not ask how is the young couple because you don't know whether the couple is still there. It's sad. But that's it. Beyond that, you don't say. And today, our children are not exposed to anything Indian. Nothing. Everything is Western. Food, they don't like Indian food in India. So they want to eat Japanese, Korean, what is that? Ethiopian. Somebody asked me, in New Jersey, you want to go to an Ethiopian restaurant? I said, those guys are dying of starvation there. What Ethiopian food are you offering? Huh? Clothes, language, everything is Western. So how do you expect anyone to have any connect with India? Forget Indian culture there's only agriculture. 31.
सर्वभूतस्थितं यो मां भजत्येकत्वमास्थितः सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि स योगी मयि वर्तते.
That yogi who rooted in oneness worships me, dwelling in all beings, lives in me, whatever be the lifestyle. So we are still on the topic, test of realization. The test of realization is the ability to see oneness everywhere. So we started with 29 where he uses the word ikshate, means one who sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self. It's a statement of fact. 30, he uses another word, pashyati, which is a more personal thing. He says he sees me in all beings and all beings in the self. And now, 31, he completely changes the whole emotion to bhajati, worships. What a fantastic trend of thought. So he starts with a fact. This is the fact. The fact is, you are Atman, everybody else is Atman. If you identify with Atman, in you, you see Atman in everybody. Next, it's not a theoretical thing, you've experienced it. So whenever you see someone, your heart reaches out to them, your whole personality goes out to them. You see me in all beings and all beings in me. You see the difference? Now, as you see that oneness, because what are you seeing? You're not seeing the physical body, you're not seeing anything. What are you seeing? You're seeing God. So just as you go to a temple, church or mosque and worship God there, you kind of see God there. You don't need to go to a temple, church or mosque, wherever you go, whoever you see, you are seeing God. And therefore, I worship you. You means you're not your personality. I worship the God principle in you. So that is the thing. That is why there is utter humility among the realized souls. They don't go around saying, you know who I am. They've reached the ultimate. All of us are fools. Vimudhatma. PhDs in fools. But he doesn't look upon us like that. What does he see? He doesn't see stupidity. He doesn't see crookedness. He doesn't see all of that. He sees God. And he worships me in them. Worships me means worships God dwelling in all beings. Then, whatever be his lifestyle, he is there. So your thoughts, your emotions, your perception, everything is rooted in this awareness. And once you have this, your entire, I don't know how to say it, your outlook changes in life. Whatever be your lifestyle, you could be belonging to any faith. You could be educated, uneducated, crude, refined. You could be wearing exquisite clothes, your taste in clothes, your aesthetics, in your life. Or you could be crude, cheap in everything. It doesn't matter. You could be wearing a sannyasi's robes, or you could be wearing flashy, cheap clothes. It just doesn't matter. What matters is this vision. So, how much are we developing this vision? You should focus on that between today and the next time we meet. Just think, how can I see God everywhere? Not in your prayer room, not in a temple, church or mosque. God is not there. God is there just as everywhere else. So then, see what happens is, why do we give prominence to a place of worship, whatever it is? How does it gain that power? It has power. Tirupati Balaji, Shirdi, Mecca, Jerusalem, wherever you go, Vatican. How does it gain that power? that aura, you feel something when you go there. Because millions of people have gone there and poured out their devotion to that. So that gains power. You understand? That same power, so who has given it power? You have given it. By itself it doesn't have. It's a piece of stone. I wouldn't say that outside. Right? Similarly, if you see God in everyone, what are you doing? You are giving your power to everybody. That is why in India we always seek the blessings of elders. You touch their feet. And the children complain, why should I touch his feet? He's not even a nice guy. He may not be a nice guy. But you're not touching his, in a sense, you're not paying homage to his personality. You're paying homage to Atman, the foundation on which he stands. So he can be anybody. That's why a great saint went to an ordinary villager and that villager touched his feet. And this sadhu did Sashtang Namaskar to that villager. So that villager saying, Swamiji, what are you doing? I am just an ordinary person. Why are you doing this? So Swamiji said, you are God. So why am I doing a Sashtang Namaskar to God? You are God. But you don't know it. Classic. And it is true. See, whenever you touch anybody's feet, he's not going to say, may you die of COVID. Nobody, not even the most wicked person is going to say that. What is he going to say? He's going to give you his blessings. So you go collecting blessings. Fabulous tradition in our country. Whoever you meet, first thing, touch his feet. Or at least, okay, don't do touching his feet. You do a namaste. You know what that namaste means? The 5 fingers represent the Panchakosha. The palm represents the Atman. So when you put both your palms together, you are saying, my Atman is the same as your Atman. And to that Atman, I bow down. What a fabulous way of greeting a person. That's why I tell even the security people in buildings, in our building, every morning the fellow used to say, good morning, ma'am. I said, kya good morning, good morning? Don't say namaste. That is our culture. But we've got programmed into saying hi, hello. You can say that because it's not trendy to say namaste. But you can make it trendy. So that's the wonderful part about this. You worship Atman in all beings. And it doesn't matter what your lifestyle is. And you focus on the wrong things. Oh, I'm spiritual, I must wear only white. Oh, I'm spiritual, I can't do this and I can't do that. Who says so? You can do whatever you like. As long as your thought, what is going on in your mind is what is important. Next verse.
आत्मौपम्येन सर्वत्र समं पश्यति योऽर्जुन सुखं वा यदि वा दुःखं स योगी परमो मतः.
O Arjuna, that yogi is said to be the best, who seeing the self everywhere, views pleasure and pain equally. So, verse 29 speaks with reference to the intellect. It's an intellectual assertion. 30 is from the heart, from the mind. You see yourself. 31 is physical. You worship God in all beings. And here he's talking about the whole world. You're seeing the self everywhere. So then when you see the self everywhere, you don't give preference to a particular thing. Views pleasure and pain equally. This samadarshinaha, this equality of vision is emphasized because we see differences. This samabhava, it's like one part of your body gives you pain, another part of your body gives you pleasure. Do you give more importance to one and not the other? No. In fact, you pander to that part which gives you pain. You look after it. A parent views all children equally. Let's say you have 2 or 3 children. Each child has a distinct personality, distinct pluses, distinct minuses. Maybe one child is a little weak in academics compared to the other 2. Are you going to say, I love this child less? You see yourself in all children. The government of the country views all citizens equally, isn't it? At least in a democracy. And it's supposed to. In fact, weaker sections are given more privileges so that they can come up. You don't give stepmotherly treatment to your left hand just because your right hand is stronger. So what must we do? From these 4 verses, but this verse particularly, where do we begin? Start by not acting on likes and dislikes. Don't say, I like this one, so I'll spend more time. I don't like that one. Stop acting on likes and dislikes. And try and equalize, try and feel equal towards everybody. How do you do that? Let's say a person has certain faults. You say, this person has a fault because of exposure, wrong upbringing, wrong values. And another person has had the right exposure. So that person is a wonderful person. But essentially both are the same. And when you develop this oneness, it is such pleasure, so much happiness you get. Because you're not constantly reacting to negativities. You're not entertaining negativity towards people. You just understand them for what they are, that's it. Try that. When you loathe someone, you dislike someone, something about that person irritates you or bugs you, start work there. And then you make an effort to bridge the gap before it becomes an abyss. Then it's impossible. Like a young girl, when she just gets married, immediately that negative emotion comes towards the in-laws. And she keeps feeding it, then it becomes an abyss. It's impossible. Impossible to bring them together. But you must take it as a challenge. How can I get along with negative people also? See Krishna's personality, even Rama's personality. See, they are our role models in India, right? And you must take a look at their life, never mind their teachings. Krishna had no enemies. Duryodhana adored him as much as the Pandavas adored him. And he also was affectionate towards them. He had no likes and dislikes. That's why he said, when both approached him, he said, I will not fight because I have no preferences. Next verse.
Arjuna uvacha yoyam yogastvaya proktaha samyena madhusudana etasyaham na pashyami chanchalatvat sthitim sthiram.
Now Arjuna asks a question. And this portion, verses 33 to 36, is about how difficult it is to control the mind. So his question is, O Madhusudana, killer of Madhu, another name of Krishna, I do not see how this yoga of equality declared by you will continue to be stable as the mind is restless. So here we enter the next topic, verses 33 to 36, mind difficult to control. So now, how is Arjuna viewing the whole thing? Number one, he knows the strength of the enemy, means he knows how difficult it is to control the mind. Why is it difficult for him? Because he has not even tried it. He hasn't made a serious attempt to control the mind. So therefore his mind is still restless, still jumping from one place to another, still difficult to control. And the most important thing is, he really does not want to control. See, if somebody were to tell you, come, let's play golf, let's learn golf. You'll say, difficult, I don't want. Why do you say that? Because you're not interested. But a person who's really interested will say, Chal, let's go. You know, like pickleball and things like that have recently been introduced. There are people who are quite old, people in their 70s who go play pickleball. They're enthusiastic, they want to learn. Then there are 30-year-olds who say, it's difficult. What is so difficult about it? So, this is the reason Arjuna is asking this question, and he continues in the next verse.
चञ्चलं हि मनः कृष्ण प्रमाथि बलवदृढम् तस्याहं निग्रहं मन्ये वायोरिव सुदुष्करम्.
O Krishna, the mind is fickle, violent, powerful, and unyielding. I think it is as difficult to control as the wind. So you see, he is emphatically asserting his opinion. Because Krishna has been talking about controlling the mind all this time. And he uses 4 words. All of it is true. What Arjuna is saying is true. But he's not taking certain things into consideration, which Krishna answers in the next few verses. So he uses 4 words to describe the mind. Chanchala, fickle. Our mind is so fickle. And this is portrayed in Julius Caesar, where Brutus assassinates Caesar. And he declares to the crowd there, not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more, that Caesar had basic faults because of which I assassinated. And the whole crowd says, Hail Brutus, Hail Brutus. Once he's done, Mark Antony sets aside his grief. He is really agitated because not only was Caesar assassinated for the wrong reason, he's a good man who was assassinated, but by Brutus, whom Caesar considered a dear friend. So he was a traitor of the worst kind. But he sets aside his grief and all that he wants to do is clear Caesar's name. So he goes and asks permission to speak at Caesar's funeral. Brutus is still, he doesn't understand this fickle-mindedness. He is riding on a high because all the public has said, Hail Brutus. So he very graciously gives permission to Mark Antony to speak. And the second mistake he makes, which is even more dangerous, is he leaves the scene. So there's no way of gaining the thing back. And Mark Antony, if you hear his oration, it is all of 10 minutes maybe. In a matter of a few minutes, he changes the opinion of the crowd completely from admiring Brutus and saying, Hail Brutus, to gunning for him. after Mark Antony speaks, they are going after Brutus to kill him. This is how fickle the mind is. You've seen people. It's like children. You know, a child comes home from school and says, Mama, so and so is my best friend. 2 days later, I hate her. What's happened? The mind has changed. And so you must understand this. Your mind is chanchala, you can't go by it. Second, pramathi, violent. It's a force to reckon with. It's like a dam bursting. The Othello, when Iago showed him his Cassio wiping his beard with his mother's handkerchief. Cassio was the captain, who recently appointed captain because Othello got a promotion. And Iago thought that he would be made captain in place of Cassio. So he is burning, he wants to finish off Cassio. That is his intention. But what happens is something completely different. So what he does is, he gets his wife, who's Desdemona, Othello's wife's maid, to take that handkerchief that Othello had given his wife, saying, it belonged to my mother, the mother is no more. So it's very sacred to him. He gives it to the wife. Iago, the villain of the piece, gets his own wife, who is Desdemona's maid, to take that handkerchief and give it to Cassio. So all this is engineered by Iago. And then he brings Othello and says, see, Cassio, he's wiping his beard with your mother's handkerchief. And he gets provoked. Right? He gets provoked to the extent that he puts 2 and 2 and makes 5. So he concludes that his wife Desdemona has a relationship with this guy Cassio, which is not true at all. But Othello, this is it, the mind is so violent. He doesn't even bother to ask his wife Desdemona. All he had to do was ask her, where is my mother's handkerchief? The truth would have come out. But he goes and strangles her to death. This is how violent the mind is. You must see in yourself what violent reactions there are in you, which are totally disproportionate to the trigger. And why are you reacting like that? Where is this anger coming from? It's all answered in the latest podcast, right? In this one. Episode 12. Watch it. There is an interesting aspect of Ram Navami also, because it's tomorrow. Balavat, powerful. It is subtle. It's like the wind. The wind is subtle, but it can uproot trees. It can create havoc. Mind is like that. And dridham, unyielding, stubborn. People who operate with the mind are stubborn. They're not open to logic at all. It's like, and it could be a positive emotion also. Like Sorab and Rustam, the poem. Sorab the son, wants to just find his father. And his father has gone away into seclusion because the mother lied to him when Sorab was born. Instead of telling him the truth that it's a son, she said, a girl is born. So he was so disappointed that I can't now train him and after my warfare. So he goes into hiding. And Sorab, the son, after all, he had the father's genes. So he grew up into another warrior, unbeatable warrior. And all he wanted was to find the father. But what a way he chooses. He says, let me challenge people to war and my father will come out of hiding. He does come out of hiding. And father and son are now fighting. What a sad thing. So you see, when they fight in single combat, one of them has to die, right? That is it, unyielding, stubborn. Rustam refuses to believe that there is another way of finding the father, where both can survive. So he says, therefore I think it is as difficult to control as the wind. And now watch how Krishna answers. 35.
श्रीभगवानुवाच असंशयं महाबाहो मनो दुर्निग्रहं चलम् अभ्यासेन तु कौन्तेय वैराग्येण च गृह्यते.
Krishna answers, and you see the psychology, and you must follow at least the psychology, if not the philosophy. O Mahabaho, mighty armed one. You know what the psychology is? Because he's saying, yes, the mind is difficult to control, but you are a Mahabaho, Arjuna. How are you saying all this? O Mahabaho, mighty armed one, without a doubt the mind is difficult to control and wavered. So he wholeheartedly first agrees with Arjuna. So what happens? He completely disarms him. You know, when someone is saying something that is totally wrong, and you know the truth, if you were to, suppose Krishna were to say, Arjuna, you're talking rubbish. This is the truth. Do you think he'll accept it? So he has to get Arjuna on his side. So what does he say? Beyond doubt, O Mahabaho, the mind is difficult to control and waver. And then very quietly he slips in the truth. But, O Kaunteya, son of Kunti, means you're a brother to me, Arjuna. He invokes affection. It can be contained with practice, abhyasena and vairagyena. Two things you need to control this mind that goes out of control. Vairagya, initial abstinence. Remember, I think last time we spoke about Rama and how he hides behind a tree and kills Vali. Vali represents lust. So if you have a weakness for anything, like sweets, alcohol, whatever, you can't control sweets while your house is full of mithai and chocolates. So first, there has to be that distance. You have to withdraw. Like Wednesday evenings. You come here, so your evening is gone. So to that extent, you have withdrawn from the world, right? You may have been invited to a party, you may have a wedding invitation, you will go there. You won't come. But whatever. There is that initial vairagya, withdrawal. And then you quickly recompense it, make up for it with knowledge. So you don't feel frustrated, you don't feel denied at any time. This is how you must proceed in the spiritual life. Then what happens? You become free from vikshepa, sorrow. And avarana is the illusion that the waking state is real. So the first thing that happens with a little spiritual knowledge is your sorrow goes away. We've fallen in love with sorrow. Constantly complaining and whining and ask anybody. First thing is, it's so hot. End of March in Mumbai city, how will it be? Will it be freezing cold? It's hot. Accept it. What fun. You can wear summer clothes, light clothes, you can go for a swim. You don't need to wear heavy woolen clothing. Enjoy it. So,
what will be the pointer for what I am awakening state like
now going back to your original question, not allowed. Think about it because I have answered your question. And it's a difficult question you're asking, so don't expect to find the answer immediately. Focus on this. You have to have a little bit of vairagya and make up with knowledge. Next verse.
असंयतात्मना योगः दुष्प्राप इति मे मतिः वश्यात्मना तु यतता शक्यो वाप्तुमुपायतः.
I consider it difficult for the uncontrolled to gain yoga, but the self-controlled one can gain it with effort. So again he is agreeing with Arjuna. Yes, what you are saying is right, it is difficult. But for whom? For those who haven't even tried. But the self-controlled one achieves it effortlessly. So there are two things here. Exercise whatever intellect you have to control to whatever extent you can. You might fail. Like for instance, suppose there's a person who just wants to be healthy, is not necessarily diabetic or anything. Says, I will not eat sweets Monday to Friday. Weekend I will eat. But then he is invited to dinner on Wednesday evening, today. And his favorite food, sweet dish is there. Ras malai. Impossible to control. So he has it. Huh? But that's okay. He's controlling 4 days a week. Only once he's succumbed. It's okay. Next time, maybe he'll be able to control. He'll say, not now, on Saturday. So a little bit of control, then your intellect gets strengthened, and with that you're able to control more, and that's how you proceed. Now Arjuna asks another question. 37.
अर्जुन उवाच अयति श्रद्धयोपेतः योगाच्चलितमानसः अप्राप्य योगसंसिद्धिं कां गतिं कृष्ण गच्छति.
Arjuna said, O Krishna, what recourse is there for the uncontrolled one who does not obtain perfection in yoga, whose mind strays away from yoga in spite of having Shraddha? So with this verse, we go to the next topic, which talks about what if I am unsuccessful in the spiritual path? I don't reach realization, which is likely. Because how many people reach realization? In an entire world, 8 billion of us, maybe 1 or 2 reach, if at all. So Arjuna has a valid point here. He says, but again, he brings up this issue because he is really not interested. If a person were interested, like Ekalavya, even though the Guru denounced him and sent him away, he didn't give up. He made a statue of Guru Dronacharya, practiced in such a way that he was better than Arjuna. And more importantly, he reached realization. So, such people are very rare. And the other thing Arjuna is asking is, what is the use of all this? If I am not going to get and my mind strays away from yoga in spite of having Shraddha. So why is he asking this question is that most people, if you take people generally or you take yourself, when you start something new, you start with great enthusiasm. Suppose you say, I must do yoga every day or I must go for a walk every day. You're very enthusiastic, you go buy new shoes, new socks, everything, clothing, and you start. How long does it last? Few days. After that you start making excuses. I had a late night last night. I'll skip today. I'll go tomorrow. Things like that happen. So you start with great enthusiasm, but somewhere down the line you lose focus. Or initially it's easy because all you have to do is start using your existing intellect. You're able to do it. But as you proceed at higher levels, the going gets tough, where you have to deal with your attachments, your strongest attachment, how you're going to let go. Your weakness, a very strong weakness that you have, how are you going to get out of it? So because it gets tough, you stop. Or a particular desire comes in the way. There are people who've achieved great things, and suddenly one little desire, one little attachment takes them off course. Then they're finished, they get involved. So because of this, there are many people at the bottom, and as you go to the top, it reduces, which is indicated in the story in the Mahabharata, where after the war, Yudhishthir decides to go to heaven. And initially, all his brothers and their wives, family, cousins, all of them join him. And as it gets difficult, one by one, they all drop off. Until the end, there is only him and the dog. So you must be, that is why consistency, constant effort is very important. If you want to achieve anything, there must be certain things that are non-negotiable. Like when I was a student, the class used to be on like this, Wednesday or Tuesday, I forget which day. And I used to go to the class every week, irrespective of what happened. There was a wedding in the family, I said, I will come after it. I'll come in the morning. But 6:30 to 8 is sacred. I will not budge. So things like that. That's studying every morning. So there may be times when you're not able to wake up at a time that you have decided, 5:30 or 5, or in my case it was 4 o'clock. Even now, sometimes your sleep pattern gets disturbed, you're not able to wake up. That's fine, but at least you make up for it. Even if, let's say, even if you wake up at 6 o'clock, you will study 6 onwards. And you give up something else. But this is non-negotiable, whatever it is that you want to achieve. Then you achieve. And there must be, it's not just that 1 hour in the morning. There must be this constant effort to pull back your mind on the spirit, Atman. It's not difficult. And therefore you must grab every opportunity to be consistent. Which is why we are offering this retreat. Don't get it wrong, it's not about money. Why would I want to make money at this stage of my life when all my life I've been doing free? It's not about money, it's about getting people to experience what it is for 2 days. You just withdraw from the world and you have no idea how free you feel. Just for those 2 days. Because you're away from it all. hustle and bustle of the city life. So these opportunities are rare, grab it. I'm talking to the wrong people, but anyway. Set everything else aside and come. So that consistency. If you're consistent, then there is nothing that you can't achieve in life. Next. Yeah.
Anytime he says uncontrolled one means mind is not controlled or senses are not controlled.
Both. Uncontrolled one is one whose senses and mind are going astray and the intellect has no control over it. So it could be an attachment, it could be a sense indulgence, it could be anything. Action. Like even at work, at your business, you achieve one thing, you want something else. And so there is that vigor that forms. Vigor is that momentum that gathers, which pushes you towards the world. And your intellect is not able to control at all. So you go from one thing to another. And if you follow that, God help you. Because at some stage, you're going to fall apart. Like that billionaire real estate guy who was a refugee of the Second World War, and he went as a refugee to the United States. He built up a business of billions of dollars, and he lost it all in one transaction in London. Not only did he lose his money, his brother's money, all investors lost. And a journalist in New York asked him, "What do you attribute this loss to?" You know what he said? Just one word: greed. So that is the thing. Whatever it is that you're doing, if you can't control it, it gathers momentum. And once it gathers momentum, it's like an avalanche. You can't do anything about it except suffer. Which is why every king in India had an in-house sage who kept him under that balance. So they never went astray. And if the king had, all citizens had the privilege of this knowledge. Now there is no awareness. Nobody wants it. Even if it is offered, you don't want it. Because you don't see the connection. See? You don't see the connection between the knowledge. Like now we are learning these few verses. If only you were to see the connection between this particular verse and your life, you would be hooked. See? And how can you translate it into money? You're investing, not money. Unfortunately, people equate everything with money. Even materially, you will prosper. There is a businessman who during the COVID times studied the Gita with me, start to finish, first chapter to 18th chapter. And recently when we met, he said, "I don't even want to think about it," because he was in the doldrums, down and out, mentally, not materially. And no one else knew about it. You see, externally it was fine. Internal only he knows and I know. No one else knows. And that person was really on, I can't tell you how bad it was. And through the Gita knowledge, he picked himself up and now he is doing well. Luckily, he has not forgotten that it's the Gita that got him back on his feet. And the environment during the COVID times was also bad, negative. So you've got to be able to see, and that's why we started by saying there must be that vision. If you don't have that vision of what you're worth, of what you're capable of, then you'll be content where you are. Eh? How can you? See, everyone's vision is limited. You talk to a servant. What is his vision? I want a pakka house. I want whatever, so many grams of jewelry for my wife. I want this. Very limited. Then you talk to a peon in a company. What is his vision? What is the salesman's vision? The managing director's vision? All have limited vision. So you are imprisoned in that vision, of that small-mindedness. You must break through. And the worst small-mindedness is where you can't spend money. On yourself you'll spend. But you can't, and even on yourself, you're unwilling to invest in your own growth. Do you know the entire Indian ethos? Nobody, there is no investment in research in India. Why do you think in America, for Silicon Valley, why is it the birthplace of, every year I go there, every year I see something new? Because they are research oriented. I've seen these people, PhDs, double PhDs, just focusing, they're futuristic in their thinking. How do you think all this AI and all that has come? Apple, every product, every model is an improvement on the previous one. How do they get it? Research. We Indians are only copiers. And yet, as sages, masters at research. That's how they got to the understanding that there is a fourth plane of consciousness. You know? So please break free from this prison of your own making. Think about it. There are certain things due to your upbringing, maybe due to your thinking in the past, you have confined yourself to a small area and you don't think beyond that. That's the prison. Self-imposed prison here. So you must break that, and then you breathe an ethereal air. You breathe freedom. From what? Your own prison. 38.
कच्चिन्नो भयविभ्रष्टः छिन्नाभ्रमिव नश्यति अप्रतिष्ठो महाबाहो विमूढो ब्रह्मणः पथि.
O Mahabaho, does the unstable one, lost to both and deluded in the path of Brahman, not get destroyed like a fragmented cloud? So here is Arjuna's question. Fallen from both means I'm somewhere in the middle. I've given up the material. Meaning, you understand the futility of material pursuit. So you're no longer excited about weddings and parties and things like that. But you're not yet established in the higher. So you're kind of lost. And every one of us goes through the stage where we feel I'm neither here nor there. It's like Sita in the Ramayana. She got abducted by Ravana, right? Which means you have fallen prey to your own weaknesses. Then she says, no, that Vairagya, she refuses. Ravana promises her the earth and heaven. She says, no, and she chooses to stay in the Ashoka Vanam. Shoka, grief, Ashoka, non-sorrow. So when you say no to indulgences in the world, you withdraw. You are in a state of no sorrow, but you have not got to the positive state of bliss yet. So he is asking about that. What happens to me then if I'm stuck in the middle? There is that fear because it's a lack of confidence. You don't have that confidence that I'll take off. Doesn't matter. This is an intermediary state. Like Sita had. She refused. And then the moment you refuse, what happens? Hanuman appeared with Rama's ring. What a beautiful story it is to depict what happens in our lives. The moment you say no and you develop this conviction, somehow God sends messages to us, as it were, that, Beta, don't worry, you're on the right path, keep going. You know? Same thing happens in Plato's metaphor, where this young man decides that the whole world can't be just this cave, there has to be something. And then he reaches a state where he's in pitch darkness. He's lost sight of the fire in the cave and he hasn't yet got to the mouth of the cave. But he still continues because he has this conviction that there has to be something beyond. And very soon he sees a diamond sparkling in the distance. That's the mouth of the cave. Now he knows he's always been right. No? So this is it. Sita in the Ashoka Vanam. This young man in Plato's metaphor. All you have to have is the commitment and determination to keep going. Never mind if nobody's with you. Never mind if everybody drops you. What does it matter? You are alone. You are answerable only to yourself. Keep going. And then you'll see this sparkle. Hanuman will appear with the ring of confidence. How it must be for Sita when she's all alone and no hope whatsoever of getting back to Ram. And suddenly this monkey appears with a ring and she knows now Ram is coming. It's a fantastic story. And all you have to have is that determination. You'll get there. We'll end with a prayer.
पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते।